Do Catholic priests go after young boys because the priests are gay and repressed? Is the solution to root out homosexuality in the Catholic Church? Up next on Real Life. American cardinals came back from their special meeting with the Pope in Rome this week, and the news wasn't really that good. The cardinals and the Pope decided that American church leaders would take action against pedophile priests, but only some of them, only the ones who were notorious and serial and predatory. So if you are a priest who abused only a couple of kids and you were nice to them in the process and it stayed pretty hush-hush, I guess no one in the church is going to come after you. This is not consoling news for any American Catholic parents. This is not good leadership, and you wonder what is going on behind rectory doors that any church official would make distinctions about the statutory rape of young people. Meanwhile, a lot of observers say it is boiling down to a fight between conservative Catholics and liberal Catholics. The liberal Catholics say celibacy is the problem. The conservatives say homosexuality is the problem, and we cannot allow gay priests or seminarians. With me to talk about all this today is Jeff Stone, a former national board member of Dignity USA, the nation's largest organization of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Catholics. Jeff is also co-author of the best-selling book, Growing Up Catholic. Also with me is Dr. James Mahan, a professor of sociology at William Patterson University who specializes in religion. Dr. Mahan spent 7 years as a teen in junior seminary before deciding not to become a priest. I want to thank you both for being here. I'm going to start with you, Jeff. Is there now a scapegoating of gay Catholic priests?
Well, unfortunately, Mary, I think there is a scapegoating, and I think the question has naturally arisen because there do seem to be a preponderance of boys among the victims of sexual abuse. In fact, we don't really know if that's going to turn out to be the case in the end, because there's been no comprehensive study of who the victims really are. There are experts who have been quoted in the New York Times and elsewhere who say that they believe that ultimately the number of female victims will be at least as many as boys, if not greater. But nevertheless, the real issue is priests who have abused the trust of the collar, who have, and the hierarchy which has covered the situation up for these past many decades. We absolutely believe that all these offenses should be reported to the civil authorities. This should have been done from the beginning, but there has been a culture of secrecy and cover-up in the church which has allowed this problem to fester.
Some also say, some experts, Jim Mahan, that there is a culture of homosexuality in the priesthood. From your 7 years in the seminary, is that something you saw up close?
Well, you have to realize that my 7 years in the junior seminary occurred in pre-Vatican Council church, and it wasn't something that was an issue. The rule of the life that we were all aspiring to was the practice, the observance of celibacy, and that was equally incumbent on a heterosexual or a homosexual. And our training was to teach us how to observe and be faithful to that rule.
Was there any training at all on your sexuality? Obviously, you're all young guys, very young guys.
Well, we were high school and early college students at that time. No, there wasn't very much comment whatsoever about reference to sexuality. There were a lot of rules that we followed that, in retrospect, were clearly erected in order to throw up a protection or a protective barrier against the practice of any kind of homosexual inclination.
Such as what?
Well, for example, when we were to change clothes, we never appeared nude in front of our colleagues. There was a way of dressing that you would take off your shirt and so on, and then put a bathrobe over your shoulders and turn and face your locker, and then you would change your trousers and so on. So through all those years, and I was in that environment for 7 years, I was never in a situation where I was nude or my fellow students were nude in front of each other.
Okay. Jeff Stone, there are experts who put the number or the percentages of gay Catholic priests at somewhere between 30% to 50%. Does that seem like a fair estimate?
That seems like a fair estimate, Mary. And I think part of what's going on here is that people are just getting used to the fact that there are a lot of gay Catholic priests. Of course, gay people have known this for a long time. For a long time, the Church didn't want even to acknowledge that fact. So we find it kind of ironic that you know, for decades we were invisible. Now all of a sudden they've recognized us, and we're the source of all the problems. You know, rather than this system which has covered up this abuse. I think it's also really important to distinguish between pedophilia and sexual misconduct with older adolescents. Both are absolutely wrong and should not be allowed to take place, but they are different psychological phenomena from what I understand from what experts say. Pedophilia is an attraction to children below the age of puberty, and those cases are a relatively small number of what we're hearing about now. Most of the cases are of sexual misconduct with adolescents, and it's a very complex situation. There are a lot of gay clergy within the priesthood, yet there are experts who will say not all the priests who are abusing even boys are actually homosexual in orientation now. They're saying many of these men are sexually immature, they're psychologically undeveloped, that they may be repeating an abuse that they themselves experienced, or they're working out sexual conflicts and issues that they never did work out in their youth and in their adolescence.
In a sense, perhaps, psychosexually, these priests who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s,
Yes.
were actually 14.
Yes, exactly. Mentally, you'll have researchers talk about conversations with these men who have abused adolescent boys, and they will talk about them almost as if they're equals, almost as if they're schoolmates, and there's a lack of perception on the part of some of these men that they don't seem to perceive that you may have a 35-year-old man talking about a 15-year-old boy, and not recognizing the very, very different situations they're in, not to mention the responsibility of being a priest.
Being the supervisor.
The pastoral, the spiritual
right,
guide.
The shepherd,
The
so to
shepherd,
speak.
someone who's totally trusted by the parents. This is an incredible brooch of trust, and we absolutely condemn any instance of abuse.
We have to take a short break. We will be back with more on our discussion of the sex scandal in the Catholic Church, and we'll further explore the issue of whether the abuse is tied to pedophilia or homosexuality. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
You're watching Real Life, awarded for broadcasting excellence with a prestigious 2001 Emmy Award. CN8, now more than ever. Tune in, find out.
Quote, then there was the scapegoating of gays. Equating homosexuality with child abuse is one of the oldest slanders there is, but this church didn't hesitate to invoke it to deflect attention from its own culpability. Besides, now that we know that perhaps as many as half of America's priests are believed to be gay, a church that still preaches that homosexuals are intrinsically disordered relies on these allegedly sick people to run its dioceses, churches, and schools. Talk about cognitive dissonance. That quote is from Time magazine columnist Andrew Sullivan. Welcome back to Real Life. We are talking today about the sex scandal in the Catholic Church. As more and more cases of priests sexually abusing boys are being made public, some Catholic faithful and right-wing Christian groups are wondering if the problem is one of gay priests rather than pedophilia. Others are speculating that with all the media publicity, women who've been abused by priests will begin to come forward and maybe even outnumber the males. Here with me to comment on whether or not gay priests are the problem, Jeff Stone, a former national board member of Dignity USA, the nation's largest organization of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Catholics, their families and friends. He is currently a board member of Dignity New York, and he's also co-author of the book, Growing Up Catholic. Also, Dr. James Mahan, a professor of sociology who specializes in religions at William Patterson University. As a teen, he spent 7 years in junior seminary before he decided not to become a priest. Dr. Mahan, okay, what can the church do? They're obviously not doing very well in terms of taking control of this problem.
Well, in my view, the focus that's being given to celibacy as being the cause of clerical sexual abuse of minors, and the attention that's being given to homosexuality in the church as a cause, both serve to distract from what I think is the central issue, and in the quote that you read from Andrew Sullivan, he alludes to it, which is the defaulting on the part of the bishops as the managers and the administrator of the church, defaulting on their fiduciary responsibility to protect and to dispense faithfully the assets, both the spiritual and the material assets of the church, and to pay a lot of attention, I feel, to either of these other issues distracts from what is the real problem, in my view, which is how do you hold managers accountable for their failings in a hierarchical organization? What you see, especially in Boston and in other places in the United States, is a growing demand on the part of the faithful and the laity to have input on who is to be their pastors, who is to be their bishops.
Okay, this is the democratic American model.
Exactly.
But Rome doesn't like that. Rome thinks that we're an obstreperous church in this country anyway. Rome doesn't think we should have input. We should take what the Pope and everybody below him says.
I think there's been a big attempt, Mary, to roll back the reforms that came about in the church in the 1960s, which from the Vatican II Council, which was a liberalizing, an opening of the windows of the church, bringing the church into the modern world.
So now we want to close the windows.
I think that's what we're seeing. We've been seeing it. I think Pope John Paul II is a great man in many, many ways in terms of dealing with communism in Europe and dealing with relationships with other religions and so forth. But I think on the issues of lay participation within the church, we've really taken a step backward during this papacy. We're not dealing with the issues that we need to deal with, the issues of gender, of the possibility of ordaining women, the possibility of allowing married priests, dealing with homosexuality and coping with the new understandings of human sexuality that we do have.
Okay, and you were telling me before that, I mean, one basic problem that the Catholic Church has is that we're just not calling in enough priests.
There's
right?
27,
we don't have enough people to staff the churches.
Exactly. And I think this is also feeding into the sex abuse scandal and everything else that the church is doing right now. They've been very reluctant to put out any priest because they need these men to fill the slots. At this point, 27% of U.S. parishes are without a resident priest. We have more priests over 90 than under 30 in the United States. I mean, I think there's absolutely no way, even if they could carry out this purge of gay priests and seminarians, which some fear may happen, you're going to cut the priesthood that we have by 30% or 50%. The church will absolutely fall apart. It absolutely would not be able to function. What we really fear is going to happen is that they're going to scapegoat a few priests, and who those priests are going to be are the ones who've been more open about their sexuality, not sexual activity, their orientation. These are the healthier people, these are the sexually mature people, but we really fear that some of those are going to be made scapegoats. They won't really eliminate most gay priests.
They can't get rid of them
They
because
can't get
they
rid
need
of them.
them.
They'll just drive them further into the closet, and I think you'll just have more kinds of really unhealthy behaviors and attitudes.
We have to break, but I want to ask Jim one last question. Before we go to break, should we urge a lot of these cardinals to resign? Anybody who winked and nodded and kept moving around the priest with the known predilection for preteens and teens?
Well, that's really a question that one has to ask the members of the parishes and the members of the various communities, whether they feel that it's necessary for these leaders to resign in order to demonstrate that change is going to happen and change is possible. But I think we also have to realize that this is not a current situation. Either the sexual abuse of minors, based on what we know, is something that is well under control and has been since the early 1990s, and likewise the shuffling of these offending priests from one assignment to another.
So these are old sins, and we have to decide. Okay, we're going to go to break. We will be back with more, so stick with us. Coming up on Real Life on Tuesday, college almost for free. Your high school senior has made a final decision about which college to attend in the fall, and you're left wondering, how am I going to pay for this? Our guest expert scholarship coach, Ben Kaplan, will be here to take your calls. No matter what kind of student your teen is, Ben says scholarship money lies within reach. On Wednesday, debate on sex ed in schools. Liz Tate of Concerned Women for America will dust it up with Philadelphia family law attorney Lynn Gold-Bicken about whether or not sex ed should be part of school curriculum. Welcome back to Real Life. Our topic today, are gay priests the problem in the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal? The speculation is that priests who are gay will be the scapegoats for this scandal. With us, Jeff Stone of Dignity USA, an organization of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender Catholics. He's also co-author of the book, Growing Up Catholic. Also with us, Dr. James Mahan, a professor of sociology who specializes in religion at William Patterson University in New Jersey. Dr. Mahan spent 7 years in junior seminary before he decided not to become a priest. Now, Jim, you were saying right before we went to break that these cases of sexual abuse, many of them date back quite a bit, and there is a sense that the sexual abuse by priests is more under control now. Is that true?
I would make that argument because since 1992, 1993, there has been at least a recommended set of procedures that the dioceses follow in dealing with these matters. For example, reporting the instances or incidents to the legal authorities for their investigation, suspending the priest from ministry during the time of the investigation, offering help and assistance to the victims and their families of the abuse. And these procedures have been in place. Now, we have to understand, however, that because of the nature of the hierarchical structure in the Catholic Church, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops cannot, through some majority vote, approve a set of procedures and make it obligatory for all the bishops in the 197 some dioceses in the United States to follow these things. So there is a certain amount of flexibility that is possible. The only way every bishop could be required to follow a set of procedures would be for Rome to decree it. I frankly thought that this was going to be one of the things that would come out of the meeting in Rome, and some people say that the meeting did have the effect of telling American bishops that they were going to have to step up and deal with these problems in a severe fashion. But that hasn't happened yet. So this reference to the fact, as you mentioned, the Archbishop of Newark in today's paper was reported as saying they won't get agreement, and they won't get agreement. Right. And whatever the majority of the bishops feel is the appropriate way to deal with these matters is going to become the obligation of all the bishops to follow only if Rome approves it and tells them to do it. So your question, of course, is this no longer a problem? The statistics would suggest that it's not a problem of the degree that it was from the middle 1980s and going back.
No one is going to get caught doing this right now, right? Because
we hope not, Mary. I mean,
it's too awful to think about. But what do you do for the future?
Well, I think, as Jim suggested, I think American Catholics were looking to the cardinals and to the Vatican to come up with a real policy to deal with sexual abuse. But instead, what we got was Bishop Gregory, who's the head of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, coming out on the very first morning and saying, what we have to look at is homosexuality in the
Right.
priesthood. This is what has particularly disturbed not only gay Catholics, but many other Catholics. This is a diversion from the real issue. You know, the bishops are not like the U.S. Congress. It's not a majority vote.
Right.
You know, you don't vote and then everybody follows it. Bishops really are very independent operators in their own diocese.
Okay, we have to go to break. We will come back to wrap up. Maybe we'll get some answers after this. Okay, we are wrapping up on our topic, are gay priests the problem in the Catholic Church with regard to sex abuse? And we want to quickly go over some alternatives that have been raised. Is it time to get rid of celibacy? I'll start with you, Jeff.
I think it is, Mary, not because I believe celibacy causes sexual abuse, but what it does is reduce the pool of seminarians to such a tiny size that I think that the Church has taken people who are not psychologically and sexually mature enough to handle this very difficult job. And that doesn't matter whether they're heterosexual or homosexual. The question is, can you handle this? I think it is time to look at celibacy, and I think it's time to look at ordination of women.
Okay, let me ask you, ordination of women, Jim. Oh my goodness.
Well, I agree with Jeff that the elimination of celibacy would certainly expand the pool from which candidates for the priesthood could be chosen. And if you open it up to ordination of women, you expand the pool even further. So it makes for a much more viable set of candidates.
But you wouldn't get wouldn't get either of those from Rome with this priest who was quite old and feeble, right?
Yes, I don't think we're going to see this change under Pope John Paul II, but I think the pressure for change is tremendous. You see polls showing American Catholics overwhelmingly support allowing married priests and women priests. I think it's coming.
And how about if you keep celibacy, do we need some kind of advanced training on how you grow and live your life when you're not having sex, when you're not having intimate relationships with anybody?
Absolutely. And I think some of the seminaries have begun to do this. They've improved greatly over what it used to be, but it does vary tremendously from seminary to seminary, and they obviously need to do a better job.
Do you agree with that, Jim?
I do agree with that. I think they're in place in the seminaries, but I think the focus is going to be on screening candidates for the priesthood to try to identify any incipient dysfunctional psychological structures there that could lead to later problems. Keep in mind, people being selected for the priesthood now are adult males.
Okay.
It's no longer like in my case. We were
and
13.
Jeff, I want one last thought. You think that the Church will pull out of this terrible crisis?
I do, Mary. I don't know when, but I think it will.
Thank you all. See ya.